This tutorial is supposed to help you learn how to use the light sensor on the NXT and using RobotC programming software. So for this particular program on your NXT, you need to make sure that your light sensor is plugged into port number 1 on the NXT brick. So we're going to open our light sensor program, and the program we want is called Light Sensor Physical Robot. We're just going to go through this program and explain it. So the first line you see at the top, it's a little bit hard to understand, kind of long and confusing. Let's just jump to this part where it says sensor. This line will pop up whenever you're using some sort of sensor, and the second part, S1, means that the sensor we're using must be plugged into port 1. This tells us that the name of the sensor is light, and this tells us that the type of sensor is a light sensor that is called light active. That means that this light sensor actually sends light out and measures how much of that light actually gets reflected back to it. Obviously, dark things don't reflect as much light as lighter things, so when you point the light sensor at a white object, you should get more light reflected than at a dark object, and that's how the sensor works. Just a couple things about this. This, where it says light here, must correspond to when in the program below, when you refer back to that light sensor, those two names have to be the same. You can change them. It doesn't actually have to be called light. It could be called light sensor, or it could be called L. It could be called really anything as long as these two things agree. It also doesn't have to be plugged into port 1. You can change that, but you must change the program accordingly. The simplest way to make those changes actually up here under Robot, Motors and Sensors Setup. And there are actually 3 tabs: Standard Model, Motors, and Sensors. And you can see that in Sensors, in the Sensor Setup window, we've named this light sensor Light, and we've said over here under Sensor Type that it is light reflected. If I click the drop-down menu, we can go back down. We can go down to where the light sensor options are, and there's another option called light ambient that we're not going to get into right now. But we also could change this in the future for different kinds of sensors: sonar, sound, color sensor, and touch in particular. We also could change the port number. If we wanted to have our light sensor on port 2, we would write the name of the light sensor here, and we'd tell the type of sensor here, and we'd say OK or apply, and it would change the program accordingly up here. But enough of that. This is a light sensor program, and let's look at the rest of the program. Hopefully you're aware that every program is going to include this task main. It must be there every time. Task main, open close parentheses. Every program is going to be encapsulated between brackets, curly brackets like that. That's the entire main program. But something new, at least if you're at this particular event, is this term while. While will put the program into something called a loop, which means it's going to do whatever is in between the bracket that follows it and the bracket that corresponds to that bracket, which in this case is all the way down here, and it's going to do what's in between this bracket and that bracket as long as the condition set forth next to the while is true. And what we've done here is something called an infinite loop. While true. This essentially means while true is true. And of course, true is always true. So therefore, it's going to do what's in between these two brackets forever. We could set this condition differently, and we will shortly, so that it doesn't do something forever. But for this, that's what the program will do. Whatever is in between this bracket and that bracket, repeat it forever. So what is in between those brackets? Well, we have another while loop, but this one says while the value of the light sensor is greater than 50, do what's in between its brackets. And what's in between its brackets? Motor B is at half power, forward. Motor C is at half power, forward. So as long as the light value is more than 50, both motors will go forward. Once that condition, the light sensor, is no longer greater than 50, if it ever drops below 50 or is equal to 50, then the program will go linearly and see what is next. And what comes after the those brackets, both of the motors are set at negative 50, so it will go in reverse. Then it will, after it goes in reverse, it's going to go to the next bracket and go back and check and see, is this condition still true? Well, true is still true, so it's going to go back and say, oh, is the light sensor greater than 50? If it is, go forward. If it isn't, go backward. Go to the next bracket, go back up and check the condition. It's still true. It's going to be true forever. It's going to loop and loop and loop and loop and loop until we actually stop the program. To run this program, you're going to say robot, compile and download. When you send this to your robot, what should happen is if you point the light sensor at something light colored or white or at the lights above you, the motor should go one direction. If you point it at something dark enough, it should go backwards. And that's the program.